So earlier this week, I was thinking about some under-recognized trends from 2025. And one of the things that stood out to me was just how common a tribrid IEM has become now. I mean, like a couple of years ago, sure, there were plenty of tribrid IEMs, but they would all cost like $500 plus. And there were, of course, some exceptions, but I feel like in the past year, there's just been a plethora of, let's say, $200 to $300 tribrid IEMs, thanks to the microplanar tweeter. And this is Dunu's take. Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the Dunu DN-242, which, yes, is not Dunu's first tribrid with a microplanar tweeter, but it is their first, or kind of like their stab at this like $300-ish price range with this driver configuration. In fact, it's $350, and the driver configuration is actually kind of interesting here. It's 2 dynamic drivers, 4 balanced armatures, 2 microplanars, and that in and of itself isn't that interesting. But what kind of stood out to me was that while a lot of IEMs now have double dynamic drivers, this one's actually using like an asymmetrical. It's got an 8mm dynamic driver and then a 10mm dynamic driver for the low bass, which makes it interesting. Does that actually have effect? We'll talk about it, but that is kind of the conceit of this IEM. But of course, like I was saying, like there's a bunch of IEMs kind of with a similar driver configuration that you can now buy for around this same price range, and maybe even less, or a little bit more. But what makes the DN-242 stand out? Well, for the past week or so, I've been living with this thing, listening to it, comparing it with the others, and I'm ready to let you know what I think. But before we do that, a quick shout out to Dunu for sending in this IEM for review. If you want to check out the DN-242, of course, I'll have it linked in the description down below. But with that said, let's go back to the table. We'll talk about what you get inside the box, which is all this stuff you see here. This is the usual Dunu melange. We'll talk about the build quality, fit and comfort, all that stuff. And then of course, we will talk about the sound quality here on the DN-242. But let's just start with the box, which is, well, it's got some art on it. And it's kind of cool looking. I don't know, it looks a little, I'm gonna say Avatar: The Last Airbender, but I don't actually watch Avatar: The Last Airbender, so I don't know. Maybe someone out there can correct me and tell me that's the wrong manga, bro. But it's nonetheless kind of cool. And well, what you get inside the box is what you see here on the table, including some like collectible cards, which have more of this anime style on them. It's kind of cool again, but then I don't know. I'm not sure what I would do with these. Maybe future Dunu IEMs are going to come with their own collectible cards. It's actually kind of a cool idea. But yeah, there's not much information. There's no like game I could play with them. Could be fun, but I'm not going to complain. Anyway, let's talk about the rest of the stuff that you get in this box, which includes this nice carry case. This is the typical Dunu carry case, which is, you know, okay, Dunu carry cases are a little bit on the large side, but they are like a nice functional large carry case, right? It's not too thick. It's not going to fit into an everyday pocket. Maybe if you wear cargo pants, you weirdo, but it will fit into a backpack plenty well. And it's got enough room in there that you can store maybe a small digital audio player. Of course, you can store all the ear tips that it comes with. But yeah, just generally a nice size carry case. And I generally like Dunu's carry cases, even though they are a little bit on the large side. The other stuff that you'll get, well, let's talk about this. You get a cleaning tool, which is how you know it's a premium IEM. I say that kind of jokingly, but yeah, it seems like these are things that come with more expensive IEMs, even though it costs probably 2 cents to make. Also things that cost about 2 cents to make, but you get more of them the more you spend, is ear tips. And it's nice to see that Dunu includes 3 different styles of silicone ear tips. In fact, I don't think there were any foam ear tips in the box, which for me, not a problem. I'm not a big fan of foam ear tips, but if you are, you might be disappointed. However, if you're a fan of silicone ear tips, you're going to be happy because they've got these 3 different styles. Now, this is kind of like Dunu's generic silicone style ear tip. They've been including these with IEMs for a long time. So an old faithful, and it's got this kind of nice rounded shape. I, to be honest, should probably play around with these and try to find an IEM fit for these more often, because I don't actually use them that much, but this shape is a really useful shape for an earphone that kind of fits shallow. Yeah, I don't know. I'll try that again in the future. But the other ones that people are more familiar with, probably because they have a little bit more fanfare, would be the Dunu SNS tips, which are these weird, I call them, they look like ditalini. It's like a pasta. So I call these the Dunulini ear tips. They are weirdly not curved at all. And I don't like these, but a lot of people love these ear tips. And so you get a full set of these. And then of course you also get a full set of candy ear tips. So when I say full set, I mean like small, medium, and large. And the Dunulinis often come in even more sizes than that. I forget. We could fish through this to count exactly how many ear tips we've got there. But yeah, I think you're going to be covered with ear tips. But yeah, these candy ear tips are personally my favorite, and they're the ones that I used on the DN-242 for myself. Now, that said, let's talk about these last bits as we kind of segue into talking about the build quality and the cable. But yeah, you do get a couple of accessories for the cable, including a 3.5 mil to 6.35 mil adapter, which you don't get a lot of the times with IEMs. So that's a nice little inclusion if you want to use these with a desktop amplifier. But of course, you do also get a 4.4 mil adapter because this cable is a swappable termination. It's a modular cable, so you can just kind of screw off this end, pull this plug out. So if you don't want to have a 3.5 mil single-ended port, you can switch over to a 4.4 mil balance port and do all of the audiophile things that you do with a 4.4 mil. Seriously, why do people love these things, man? I don't get it, but you guys do you. Let's then talk about the rest of this cable, which is, again, it's kind of like a typical Dunu cable, and it is a really nice cable in typical Dunu fashion. But some people don't love this cable because it can be a little bit on the stiff and just kind of like thick side. It's definitely not like a small, compact, weightless cable that's going to disappear on you. But I think the behavior on it is actually generally pretty good. So I like this cable. I enjoy it when I get this cable on IEMs. It's kind of heavyweight, makes the feel a little bit extra premium, and yeah, makes you feel like you're getting your money's worth for 350 bucks. Yeah, just a nice cable. And then again, just to kind of show you the behavior on it, it roadie wraps maybe one of the best of all the cables I have, just because it like almost, you can see it almost has like some verticality to the stack, and it just looks so tidy and so cute. So does that matter? Does it make it sound better? No, it doesn't make it sound better, but it makes me like it better, and that makes it sound better. But anyway, so nice cable. You do have, of course, a functional chin slider, which is nice to see. It's not very fancy looking. It's just a little thin piece of plastic, but it actually stays in place and it actually works to hold the cable nice and tight against my chin, which I dig. And then of course you've got your standard preformed ear hooks. And the one thing I will complain about this cable is I find that the little 2-pin connectors are a little bit on the tall side. You can see that, as is typical with Moondrop, they've got kind of the protruded 2-pin connector. And then on the IEM, they have kind of a light recess to it. It's not fully recessed, but it is enough that you get kind of an extra bit of stability from it. So I like that aspect of it. The only thing I don't love about it is more if I just wanted to use this cable on another IEM that doesn't have that recess. But I guess that's not this IEM. So maybe that's not Dunu's problem. That's somebody else's problem. But anyway, enough talking about the cable. Let's talk about the earpieces themselves, which of course you can make up your own mind on whether or not these things are attractive, but I think they look pretty nice. Pretty simple aesthetic, you know, just kind of like this interesting, I guess here's why I like it, is it just has a little bit more depth to it than maybe you might think on initial look at it, right? It's just got a nice glassy look to the outside, and then you can kind of see inside, I don't know what it is, like a glass or like almost looks like a volcanic stone or something. But yeah, it's just got nice kind of layers to it, bends the light at different ways. And that's the kind of stuff I like. That is what I'm here for. Now, as far as the rest of the design, I mean, it's pretty simple. There's not a whole lot going on. You've got this red and gold motif, which is vaguely Iron Man, I suppose. And then the text on the outside, I don't know, interesting. I didn't really notice this before, but a little bit of a clash between the gold outline here and then the silver text. My suggestion would be to make those match, but I don't know, maybe that's too matchy-matchy. Other than that, yeah, there's just really not a whole lot going on with the shell design here. What I will say too is that these are using a very similar shell design to some other Dunu IEMs, including the, I don't have it within arm's reach. I probably should. It's like right behind me, but the Dunu DaVinci IEM, right? Came in a very similar shell, and I feel like there's other IEMs that Dunu has released in this shell. And I've never really loved the way that those ones fit. This one seems to fit me actually a little bit better. And it's really subtle tweaks that they've made to it. Like it just feels slightly more molded here, and then also back here especially. So I get a little bit less of that bulky fit in my ear. And it actually ends up fitting a little bit more stable than I was definitely expecting. I still wouldn't say that this is like the most comfortable, the most stable fitting IEM. But it's definitely at the point where I wouldn't really complain about it anymore. So I guess with that said, let me throw out my ear and demonstrate for you. So the earpieces are, I would say, yeah, pretty medium size. You know, it might feel a little bit large for some people if you're not used to wearing a full-size IEM with frickin' 8 stinking drivers inside of it. There's a lot of drivers, by the way. But yeah, I don't know. It doesn't feel large. Like it doesn't feel like it's stretching out my conchable or anything like that. And it was an IEM that I was able to sleep with, although I will note that it is a little bit on the thick side, kind of like inside to outside. I don't know how we had to find a dimension for that. It's a third dimension that only IMs know, or sorry, a fourth dimension only IMs exist in. But there you go. So yeah, it does stick out a little bit. So like lying on your side, it might press into your conjugal and even into your ear canal, depending on how deep of an ear tip you're wearing. But apart from that, yeah, generally pretty comfortable. And again, surprisingly, decently stable. So no real big complaints there on the build quality and the form factor of it. I think mostly it's just maybe a little bit on the generic side, but I don't know. I like it better than, let's say, the Vulcan 2, which is another IM that Dunu came out with a while ago that wasn't quite generic. And well, I complained about that one for just being weird. This one is nice and normal. I dig it. Anyway, okay, that is enough talking about the build quality on this IM. Let me just check my notes, make sure I'm not missing anything. I don't think I am. In fact, I don't even have my notes up here. So we're just going free. So let's talk about the sound here on the Dunu DN-242. And to start with, let's take a look at the frequency response graph here that I've got measured on my rig. If you want to check this out for yourself, compare it to literally hundreds of other IMs that I've measured. I've got it linked on Squiglink in the description down below. But together, let's do a little bit of analysis. We'll talk about maybe what I expected from it based on this frequency response graph, and then how it differed to my ear based on my expectations. So, I mean, it's got kind of the traditional bass boost, pretty modest bass boost, but it's got a bass boost to it, right? It's not like giga bass or anything like that. If you're looking for a bass head IM, I don't know that this is the bass curve that you should be looking for, but if you're worried that you're not going to have enough bass in an IM and you just want something well balanced, this is a pretty common curve for a bass boost. And I would say that it is, yeah, just not a super bassy IM, but it's got plenty of bass. The mid-range is relatively clean, kind of like this. This is like a tuning style that I feel like was more common a couple of years ago. I kind of described this loosely as like IEF tuning, where it's more of a flat mid-range rather than kind of like this more tilted, up-tilted, warmer mid-range that we're getting with some of the more new meta IEMs. So this one is a little bit more thin in the lower mid-range. And then the upper mid-range is, you know, again, kind of IEF-ish. A little bit relaxed up here, it looks like in the frequency response, but then you've got, you know, fairly, what looks like neutral treble apart from, yeah, some air up here, which is kind of the hallmark of the microplanar tweeters. They are just kind of known for having a lot of upper treble frequencies, and this one definitely does it. So I guess in summary, what are we looking at? We're looking at, if I were just looking at this graph in isolation, I would expect something to sound relatively neutral, maybe a little bit lean, but also a little bit warm because it does have a decent amount of bass boost and not particularly bright. But how does it actually sound to my ear? Well, I'm gonna say that it sounds more contrasty to me than I expected. It sounds a little bit more V-shaped to me than I expected because it sounds a little bit brighter to me than I expected based on the frequency response graph. Now, you know me, I'm not like afraid of a little bit of upper treble. So I really don't think that it is that upper treble. I think for me in my ear, it's more about kind of like the, I don't know, like, I want to say like 7 to 10 kilohertz region is where it sounds a little bit bright and a little bit hot to me. So that, because of that, it gives it this nice contrasty kind of V-shaped sharp sound that has really nice impressive imaging. Like there's a really nice sense of separation between sounds, the distinction, the positioning and stuff like that is all really, really good. And even the bass is pretty well defined. Like it's not necessarily the tightest, like most impactful bass, but it's well defined. It's isolated from the rest of the mid-range. Like you don't have any bloaty smeariness about the bass. And yeah, it's just generally, again, it's like a pleasant bass, but not particularly a standout bass. And the mid-range ends up sounding a little bit more thin and a little bit more contrasty than, again, I would expect necessarily from the frequency response graph. So you get kind of like this bright tilted V-shaped sound signature that kind of reminds me in a way of like, and maybe this is like, you know, placebo stuff in the back of my head that's like informing my perceptions, but kind of reminds me of the Kiwi Ears Quintet, which was, now that I think about it, like one of the earlier IEMs that shipped with a microplanar tweeter, sort of this, especially in this like price range, which I also kind of felt like it sounded a little bit brighter than necessarily it graphed, and I'm kind of getting that experience here. But how does that compare to some other more modern IEMs that have also got this microplanar tweeter tribrid configuration? Well, let's talk about those. So I've got a handful of them here to talk about. We've got, of course, the Moondrop Cross Critical Dusk. This one came out, I'm gonna say about 1.5 years ago, kind of the first half of 2024. Over here, we've got the ZGOT Horizon, which just came out a couple of months ago. So this is this is like sort of like a predecessor to this trend, and then this is like this one is fully in the trend. And then over here we've got the Crin Ear Daybreak, which is actually a bit of a departure in a couple of ways. Not the least of which, it is the cheapest IM here on the table at like 180 bucks. So price range on these 4 IMs, like 350 bucks for the DN-242. I'm gonna say $330 for the Horizon. No, this one's $400 now for the Dusk, and then the Daybreak, like I said, 160 bucks. So how do they compare? How should I go through these things? I'm gonna go through them one by one and just kind of give like a rough comparison. So the Horizon is definitely gonna be one where you get that upper treble air boost, which to me, I don't end up hearing as very fatiguing. Like I end up hearing the air on this IM just actually kind of add almost like a next level sense of transparency to the mid-range, oddly enough. And the rest of the sound signature, I end up sounding, it sounds just more mid-range forward to me than over here on the DN-242. Man, I gotta, that name, DN-242, is that really what it's called? Is it just the 242? Anyway, the Horizon just ultimately ends up sounding a little bit more mid-range forward to me, less about the bass, less contrasty overall, although it still has like a nice sense of contrast, good sense of space about it. It doesn't have quite that in-your-face level of contrast that, again, I find makes the DN-242 maybe just a little bit on the fatiguing side, but it is also, because of that, pretty exciting. Whereas the Horizon, it might end up sounding a little bit boring to you. But personally, I actually kind of like this. You still get a good sense of separation and head stage. The other one I'll talk about here is the Moondrop Critical Dusk, which I'm always, just for the record, I'm always listening to this with an analog cable. I know that this IM is known for its DSP tuning, which also sounds very good. I just don't really love using the DSP cable. So I'm always using this thing on analog, and I like the way that it sounds like that. So in this comparison, the Dusk is actually kind of like the thinner, brighter sounding IM, or like the more mid-range kind of forward, open sounding IM. But interestingly, I find it to be less fatiguing. Again, like I think that there's something in like I want to say like 8 to 10 kilohertz range on the DN-242 that's giving me a little bit of extra fatigue that I'm not necessarily seeing in the frequency response graph, and that I'm not getting here on the Dusk. The Dusk just ends up sounding, similarly contrasty. Like it has a nice sense of definition, a really strong sense of definition, actually. I think the imaging is maybe even a little bit stronger here on the Dusk. And the mid-range is also a little bit on the thinner side on the Dusk, which would, in my mind, exacerbate the fatigue levels of the treble, but it doesn't. It ends up sounding to me more smooth and just more vocal focused, just really transparent in the vocals, which is why I love the Dusk so much. And then the other thing I love about the Dusk is just next level bass impact and also texture. Like it's just really, really strong with the bass. It is not gobs of bass. In fact, if you're looking for more bass, you might actually end up preferring the DN-242 because it's more of a traditional, it's got not a ton of mid bass, but it's got more mid bass than you're going to get out of the Dusk. But ultimately, I personally find the Dusk just to be a lot more satisfying and engaging. And in some ways, the DN-242 kind of reminds me of the Dusk. It almost sounds to me like this was Dunu trying to do their version, their spin on not just this driver configuration, but specifically their spin on the Dusk. And in my mind, it just ends up coming across a little bit too contrasting, a little bit on the fatiguing side, whereas the Dusk just ends up sounding a little easier to my ear and a little bit more mid-range focus. So the last one I will talk about here is the Crin Ear Daybreak. Now, price range on this one is quite a bit different. It's almost half the price of this one, but it does have a similar driver configuration. I forget exactly what the number of drivers are, but there's a dynamic driver, there's balanced armatures, and some microplanar tweeters in this guy. And this one's actually the most different of all the ones that I've shown on here, because the microplanar tweeter execution here on the Daybreak is the most muted and the most like subdued. It almost sounds a little bit overdamped. Like it doesn't have a strong sense of separation between instruments and stuff like that. It's like, it's decent, but it doesn't have that like, in-your-face treble presentation. It's not very aggressive. In fact, it's just kind of easy sounding. What I really love about the Daybreak is the vocal repro. The vocal is just fantastic. The timbre on it is awesome. And I would say that the bass actually sounds a little bit more controlled and maybe a little bit more textured than what I get over here on the DN-242. Again, the 242's bass is not bad. It just has a little bit of a, I don't know. It's like a little bit just too contrasty, I suppose. And it sounds decent, but I do end up preferring the Daybreak. But I don't know. I think that's going to do it for my thoughts here on the Dunu DN-242. It is a decent IEM. There are a bunch of these now very decent IEMs in this price range. And I feel like a couple of years ago, I would have been super, super impressed with the DN-242. But just because there's been so many of these very decent IEMs coming out over the last year, again, the trend in 2025 is tribrids at this price range. I feel like this one fits in line. It stands out in terms of being a little bit more engaging than average in terms of its just contrast and excitement, but it does end up still sounding a little bit on the fatiguing side for me. So for me, I'm gonna give it 3 stars out of 5. I think this is a good IEM. If you wanna check it out, of course, I've got it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't yet, well, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, join me on Discord, also linked down below, and I'll catch you in the next super review. Cheers.
Joined with the force of reviews, we now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. Let's get into the future.